time, please leave through the back door. Otherwise, enjoy the presentation.
Great. Great. Thank you so much. Let me go ahead and grab this clicker. Before we start, just wanted to show you this disclaimer. So the views and interpretations on this presentation are entirely my own. They don't represent an organization per se. So I'm going to start off by talking about why we wrote the book we did and some of the science behind it. And my wife, Cathi, will talk about the effects of this lifestyle on the environment and how we could deploy it. So I'm going to take you back about 8 years. So 8 years ago, I had just turned 40, and I dropped off my boys, who were 1 and 3 years old at the time. I dropped them off in preschool, and I was on my way to work. And the hospital that I work at, I'm an internal medicine doc, the hospital I work at was only a few miles away, about 20 minutes or so. And as I was driving on the street, I remember feeling a little bit of nausea at the pit of my stomach. And I thought, boy, could that be that Chinese food I ate last night? I wonder what that is. And it started to get worse. And then I got to this red light, sort of put my head down for a second, and I started to feel some chest pain and some shortness of breath. And began to realize what was going on. I probably should have pulled over and called 911, but I stepped on the gas. I was only a few minutes from the hospital, pulled into the parking lot, and then proceeded to walk into the ER. It's probably the longest walk I've had. And I walked into the emergency room and tapped on the shoulder of my friend who was just getting off his shift and said the words you never want to hear from a friend. I think I'm having a heart attack. And so he quickly got me on a gurney, which is one of those beds. And then nurses ripped open my shirt and put these EKG leads on me. And when it was done, I asked to look at it. And when they brought it to me, there was no question in my mind I was having a heart attack. Everything sort of came to a halt for me. The nurses and the staff moved really fast. They got me on the right medications. And then they shipped me off to this place, which is called a cath lab. Some of you are probably familiar with that. I was rolled into this cold room, and the cardiologist used a little tube, a catheter, to enter one of the large vessels in my groin, and that's threaded up into the heart as they look at the coronary arteries. And after it was done, the cardiologist came over to me and said, I have bad news and good news for you. He said, the bad news is you have some major blockages in your vessels. The good news is I was able to put 2 stents in there, and he sort of left the photos not with me. And then after that, I was sort of rolled off into a room, and everything seemed to sort of come to a halt as I started to think about this. How can I prevent this from happening again? So I sort of picked myself up and returned back to work, started working out 5 times a week, going to the gym, using the treadmill, and then adopted what was considered the American Heart Association diet of the time, which is less than 30% of calories from fat, a little bit of fish, fiber, and then little processed meats, less if any. And so a few months went by, and one day I was at the gym just a few months later, and I turned the treadmill up to about 5, and I began to feel some pressure in my chest. So I turned it back down to 3, and then it went away. Turned back up to 5, it came back, turned it to 3, went away. I said, boy, this can't be good. So I went into work, and I talked to my doc about this, and he said, well, you know, we're going to put you on a treadmill. So he put me on a treadmill, and when I looked at the results, it was clear to me that it was positive. And he said, well, let's do some other tests next week. It was a Saturday, so I went home, not happy about this. And that Saturday, when I woke, I was having breakfast, I began to feel some chest pressure. So this is chest pressure at rest. So I ended up calling 911. The fire rescue ambulance came to my doorstep. I didn't want to alarm my kids. And I was shipped off, once again, back to the cath lab. And the cardiologist came, one of the best ones, one I really trust, went ahead and cannulated my artery again, went in and threaded the arteries to look at the coronaries. And after it was done, he came over to me and said, I have bad news and good news for you. I said, oh, okay. So the bad news is the areas that I put the stent in are starting to block, and then you also have some other blockages developing, and you're going to need bypass surgery. Got a bit of a shock. And then I have just the man to do it. This is the best surgeon in town. And there was someone behind him who was shaking my hand. And then I was shipped up into the hospital and proceeded to wait for the surgery. So this was a difficult time for me. I wasn't sort of expecting this. And if any of you have been mindful, you probably know the moment where you just are aware of everything happening around you. So the night before the surgery, the nurses came over and they prepared to shave my legs and chest to prepare me for it, and I almost felt like a sacrificial lamb. But fortunately, the surgeon was very good and humane, and he managed to relax me. The day off the surgery, I was given something to relax me and wheeled down there. And that's the table for bypass surgery. It looks like a narrow table there with a band, almost like a cross. So my arms were put out and bound down. And then to open up the chest. And as the anesthesiologist bent down towards me, I felt all the lights go off. And when it came back on again, I felt like I was coming up from a deep pool. I'd just come up from a dive. And someone was asking me to cough. And there was a tube in my mouth. It was a respirator from a breathing machine. And there was a tube on my chest and some wires coming out from the heart. And they were able to extubate me and then transfer me down to the recovery area. And then I proceeded to actually recover from this. The next day I was asked to try to walk, and I was given a walker. And I couldn't believe I was struggling around the ward in a walker. I had been snowboarding just a few weeks before this. So I swore that I would try to figure out how to prevent this from happening again. I know we have a very short time, so I'm just going to touch on a few things. Maybe that can help you. So how did this happen? Does this happen earlier on in life or just when we get old? If you look at that's a section of an artery, and the yellow stuff is plaque that forms when plaque develops in arteries and causes it to get narrow. So this is a study that was published in the 50s in the Journal of the American Medical Association when they looked at soldiers who died in combat in the Korean War. And these were soldiers whose average or mean age was about 22 or so. And there were about 300 autopsies that were done. And what they found was that 77.3% of them had some evidence of coronary artery disease or atherosclerosis in them. These are folks who were between 18 years old, 20, 25, so really young people, and sort of shattered people's minds when it occurred. And some people may think this is just battle stress, but more recent trauma studies looking at trauma victims of the similar age show that you have very similar statistics. So this is a disease that occurs very early on. This is not something that just happens when we get older. There was another article I came across, and this one is an interesting example that shows, actually from a public health perspective, if you look back at Norway during the 1940s, you look at the death rate. It's continuing to climb over here. The death rates continue to go up, 1927. And this is the death rate from circulatory diseases, heart attacks, strokes. That's continued to climb up to the 1940s, and bam, it drops in 1940. Do you know what happened in 1940? World War II. And so the Axis powers had taken over Norway. And to punish them, they confiscated all their livestock, so they became vegan overnight. And so what happens? The death rate drops. And then 1945 goes back up again. So what happened then? That was the end of hostilities. They got back their livestock. They started eating again. So if you look back at history, there are some lessons that maybe lifestyle does play an important role here. I came across a study that really influenced me, and this was done by Dr. Dean Ornish, who's actually from South Toledo, not too far from here. In the 1980s, he had this theory that lifestyle could play an important role in disease, especially cardiovascular disease. And so he designed this study where he took a group of patients. Half of them, he had them do the normal thing of what we do as recommended by the American Heart Association if they have heart disease. The other half, he put through some lifestyle changes. And these were the differences that he actually put in play. He had them do what's called a reversal diet, which is essentially a low-fat plant-based diet, except that he permitted non-fat milk. He allowed for egg whites, excluded avocados, but then less than 10% of calories from fat. He also had them engage in stress-releasing activities like yoga, meditation, and then also some moderate exercise, which was some walking generally. And then he followed them out at 1 and 5 years. And what he found was remarkable. At both 1 and 5 years, he found that the opening in the arteries got bigger in the folks who did these lifestyle changes. And in fact, almost a 7.9% improvement when you look at it 5 years later. Whereas those who did just what was normally expected, the opening got narrower and narrower, and things got worse for them. And he used angiography to actually look at the artery openings. There were twice as many cardiac events, which is heart attacks, angina, in the folks who were doing the normal treatment. And there was a significant reduction in angina in the folks who made these lifestyle changes. So there was a strong relationship between the folks who actually put these changes in play and getting better, and the arteries actually opening up a little bit more. What was remarkable too was that their LDL cholesterol dropped by 40% in 1 year, and they were not on any medications. He did not put that experimental group on medications. To get that kind of a drop, you'd need a really powerful drug at maximal dosage. So could this just be his study? I came across another study by Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, and some of you may know him, and he's exactly on the other coast, in the East Coast of the Cleveland Clinic. And around the same time, he also had a suspicion that lifestyle played an important role in chronic illnesses. So he followed around 22 or so patients, some of the sickest patients in terms of having heart disease. He had them sort of come to his clinic and to his house, and he had them switch to a plant-based diet, which was actually a little stricter than Ornish's. It was vegan, if you could call it that. No oil, no fish, fowl, meat, or dairy. It was essentially plant-based, but less than 10% of calories from fat. And he did not have them engage in yoga or any other activity, and they could exercise if they wished. So what he found was that at 5 years, their cholesterol dropped and continued to be sustained at 12 years out. And even more remarkable was that the patients who were actually adherent, who stuck to it, had no more heart attacks or no more coronary events when he followed them out 12 years later. There were about 5 patients who actually left the study, and they ended up with heart attacks, and there was a number of cardiac events, and one of them passed away. But the ones that followed his diet actually did well. In fact, the disease seemed to be halted and even reversed in some. So very much like Ornish, he found that lifestyle played a very important role. And this really influenced me early on. This is a lifestyle that doesn't have any side effects. There's no mortality, no morbidity. It's just changing the way you eat. So what else can this actually do, a plant-based diet? I know many are interested in weight loss. We have a huge problem with obesity in this country. There's an article out there in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition that looked at the weights of vegetarians and non-vegetarians, and there's a 16-pound difference between vegetarian men and their counterparts, and at least a 7 to 8 pound difference between vegetarian women and their counterparts. So an interesting perspective. Now, why is it that it's easier to lose weight and maintain that on a vegetarian diet? Because you're consuming less calories. It's actually more food. There's fiber in it. There's no fiber in meat, so when you consume the food with fiber, you feel full faster, you're getting less calories. So, you know, I hear there's a lot of confusion. There's so many diets out there. Which one's better? How do they rank? Vegan, vegetarian, omnivorous, pesco-vegetarian. So, not clear as to which one would cause the most weight loss until several months ago. There was a study that came out that looked at these 4 different diets right here. Actually 5 diets, and compared weight loss between them over 6 months. The diet which had the most weight loss was the vegan diet at 7.7%. Vegetarian was pretty close, 6%, so that's really good. And then the pesco-vegetarian, which permits fish, about 3.2%, similar to semi-vegetarian, which is eating meat periodically, and then omnivorous, which is eating everything. So depending upon what you wish to do, you could get really a high amount of weight loss if you wanted to strategically maximize it. So why is this difficult to do? I think we're faced with a lot of messages from the media. My father, a couple of years ago, sent me this ad of a restaurant called the Heart Attack Grill. And some of you may have heard of it. They have a double bypass burger, triple bypass burger, quadruple bypass burger. I think it has 8,000 calories, deep fried French fries, called flatliner fries or something like that. And then he sent me an article that showed someone had a heart attack while eating it, which is not surprising, in that restaurant. So there's a lot of things in the media that we're faced with. And when I drive to San Francisco, I see these huge signs with burgers like this on there. And so it's really hard to combat all this when you're faced with this in the media. When we look at what Americans are eating, this is a graph from the USDA that shows the percentage of calories we're consuming in terms of different food groups. Let's say it's a little over 2,000 calories overall. We're eating very little fruits and vegetables. It's that little green sliver up there. But we're eating quite a bit of meat, eggs, and nuts, added fats, oils, and dairy fats, so quite a bit of that. And so as you can, if you remember from the previous talk by Roseanne Oliveira, that consuming meats and oils and fats leads to increasing weight gain. So it's not surprising that we end up with higher weight. When we look at the consumption of vegetables in this country, here's a map that sort of shows it by state. California and Oregon lead the pack. We consume more than 1.8 servings of vegetables a day. But as you can see, a lot of these areas consume 1.5 or less. There are 5 states that consume less than 1.5. I think it's Louisiana, Mississippi, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Iowa.
Is it New Hampshire?
New Hampshire, yes, New Hampshire too, yes. So they also consume as much as California. And when we look at the obesity rate in countries in terms of, if you look at the world overall, just look at the far right and then you'll see that's where we are, United States. We lead the pack. We have the highest rate of obesity in the world, at least when this data was brought out. And it's not surprising considering what we're consuming. And then we look at life expectancy compared to all the other countries. And we're in the bottom quarter, that green bar, right next to Chile, in terms of life expectancy. So if we were to take this and map it out and see how much we spend on healthcare and what we're getting out of it, and you put it on a line, look at us as an outlier. We're all the way out there. So we're spending a fair amount of money, but we're not getting that life expectancy that everyone else is getting. So why is that? So as we age, is this what we are doomed to face? Increasing medications, chronic illnesses? Some would say, you know, we're after years in life, but I would argue it's life in years too. It's not years in life only, but it's also life in years. That's what the prize is. So here's an interesting cartoon. It shows the 3 major chronic illnesses we see: diabetes, heart disease, and obesity in that large tank. And that's sort of growing. In fact, in terms of prediabetes, more than 1 in 3 people in the US have prediabetes. And so as that grows, we have more and more chronic illnesses, but that's really caused by lifestyle issues, whether it's sedentary lifestyle stress, but poor nutrition, I think, is one of the largest part of it, as we saw with the Esselstyn study. So there's something each and every one of us can do ourselves by changing the way we eat, that we could actually stem the flow of this chronic illness. So the advice I would leave you with was a quote from one of my favorite authors, Michael Pollan. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. That, more or less, is a short answer to the supposedly incredibly complicated and confusing question of what we humans should eat in order to be maximally healthy. I think that's good advice. I'm actually going to turn this over to my wonderfully brilliant wife, Cathi, who will actually talk to you about the effects of this lifestyle on the environment and how to bring it to play. Thank you.
Okay, and where's your clicker? All right, so as you can imagine, I was equally scared when Raj was shipped off to the hospital. It wasn't really until I had to call my mom and say, can you come pick up the kids from daycare? Because they were so small, and I had to be there with my husband as he's having a heart attack at the age of 40. So I was equally supportive of his lifestyle change, and there are a lot of other reasons, and I know we've heard a lot of them throughout the day today, but I wanted to focus a little bit on why we called the book Healthy Heart, Healthy Planet, and that is the environmental impact that we can have by changing our diet as well. So Raj spent a lot of time going over the tremendous health benefits of a vegetarian or a vegan diet, but especially in California, where we're finally getting this blessed rain, but we know that so many of our large reservoirs are only not even at 50% capacity yet. When it takes 3,000 gallons to make enough beef for a quarter pounder, it just seems a tremendous waste. And plant-based diets require about 100 times less water than an animal-based diet. And we also have to worry about fossil fuels. It's a finite resource, and we're stripping tar sands in Canada to get it. To get 1 calorie of a plant-based protein, it takes about 2.2 calories in a fossil fuel, as opposed to using or getting the same calorie from an animal takes about 11 times more, 10 times more energy to produce. So we're just wasting a lot of fossil fuels producing animal-based diets. They also take a lot more land. If everyone in the world consumed the same kind of diet as we Americans do, it would take roughly 2 Earths to grow all the food. We don't have that. So it's 14 times more land to produce an animal-based diet. So how do you do it? If you're like, well, let me say this. If you were lucky enough, I think, to have parents who inculcated a vegan diet from the very beginning and you've always lived this way, God bless you and call your mom and thank her. I can't even do it with my own children as well as I would like. But I grew up in a household where everything was based around the meat. And the plate had, okay, we're having chicken for dinner, so we'll have rice or stuffing to go with that, or some beans and some vegetables, and that's whatever it was based around the meat. And I grew up that way, and so switching, I really had to figure out how can I make this work, because we have 2 children, we both work full time, and it's not like you can drive through and get a good, healthy, vegan, low-fat meal. You can't do that. So my goal is to shop once a week, and I prepare. I make a cooking shopping list based on the meals that I want to prepare. And I think the Veg Fest is a great opportunity. There's so many people here who already live this lifestyle that I'm going to go over how Cathi Misquitta does it. But there may be others with other great ideas that you have this opportunity to meet them and network with them while you're here. So I think this is just fantastic. So I think it's very important to consider how much time you have when you're in the kitchen. And I love the quote from Ben Franklin, failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. So the way to make this work is to really think about what you need to do. So the way I start, I think about what are we craving. I like a lot of different kinds of foods. So does my family. And so we try to gather cuisines from around the world, especially when we consider so many other cultures have great vegan options and so many different flavors with their spices. We tend to have different kinds of foods throughout the week. And I, rather than building around the meat, tend to build around the grains. So we'll have a pasta night, maybe rice, maybe quinoa, maybe breads, like vegan pizza that my husband and I like to make. And then we have the opportunity to start incorporating lots of colorful fruits and vegetables into your diet and adding a lot of variety with textures and flavors that way. And of course, what always makes it difficult for me when I travel is if I say I'm vegan and I want a low-fat food, I get boiled rice and vegetables, and I don't want that. I don't crave that. No one really does. So think about what you want to flavor your food, and that really does come to the spices that you use and the sauces that you prepare. And again, I work full-time, so I think shortcuts are okay. But you have to read the food labels because there's so much added sugar and oil in so many of the processed foods that you really do have to be careful in what you choose. But there are options out there. You just have to spend a little more time at the grocery store picking up the jar and looking at the label so that you can get something healthy for your family. I love prepackaged salads because they make it easier. Other options that I've seen in the grocery store that can make it very simple are in the produce aisle, kind of the pre-cut fajita vegetables that you can throw together, or something for the stir fry. If you don't have a lot of time, a lot of prep work can go into vegetables, but if they're already cut and ready for you, that can really save a lot of time. You spend more money on it, but it may be worth it if that's important in your diet. And the one thing I think with a vegetarian diet, it's always good not to be afraid to try something new. I think community-supported agriculture is fantastic because you're challenged, I think, every week. You get a box full of goodies, and maybe you're not used to using whatever kind of squash they put in there for the season. But here are different protein choices. Obviously, beans of any variety are excellent sources of protein, and we always forget that there is protein in grain. Going completely plant-based means giving up dairy, but there are so many different options from like the dairy perspective. In terms of milk, what we use on our oatmeal is often almond milk, unsweetened. That's what we use at home, but there are a ton of different varieties, especially if you're allergic to nuts. There's hemp milk, rice milk. I haven't even tried them all. So how do you prepare? Find the recipes, especially if you've never done this before. There are so many websites. You don't even have to have a cookbook. But if you do, as I do, you can either I think it's easier to start with a vegetarian or a vegan cookbook just to get some ideas of how things are done. But it's also very easy to substitute, I think, in some of the cookbooks that you may already own if you're not already vegan or vegetarian. So like I said, I make a list. If it's not on the list, it doesn't usually get purchased. And if I don't make the list and I forget an item, then I have to go back to the store. And I don't really want to go back to the store. I really only want to go once a week. So I have a list, I'm very studious, and I check it off as I go, and it tends to work fairly well for us. You do have to check the pantry usually before you go, because you may have some pasta already on the shelf. You may have the spices that you already need, so I think sometimes that's helpful when you're preparing your recipes. And then I just have a few slides on how to start. So if you've never done this before, what is a vegetarian or a vegan breakfast? And so lots of breads and cereals I think can be used, especially with the milk substitutes. That's always very easy. Pizza breads, that's super simple, super quick. And I'm pretty sure that Contadina, I'm not advertising any particular kind of brand, but I don't think there's any oil in that one. I think Trader Joe's also has a pre-made pizza sauce with no oil. That works really well. So whole wheat bread, some vegetables, and some nutritional yeast. That's the powder on the bottom. It tastes a little bit like Parmesan, but it's completely vegan. Burritos, super easy, super quick for those nights that you just get some fat-free refried beans and some lettuce, some salsa, and some whole grain tortillas, and you're ready to go. Pasta with greens and some beans, complete meal. You can get it on the table in probably less than 15 minutes. Stir fry, like I said, with those pre-cut vegetables, super quick. I think we always have hummus at our house. It's just something we like to snack on. I make it, I think, what do? I put spices all together for the hummus that is required, so all I have to do is scoop it out of one jar, throw it all in the food processor, and I'm done. It's super quick to do it that way. Fresh fruit, I have bowls of fresh fruit on my countertops for us to snack on, especially when the boys are hungry. Mom, I'm hungry. Get an apple. Really? Yeah. And then I just think it's easy to have the right appliance. So some things that make it easier are a rice cooker, especially because we eat a lot of brown rice. Just having it, put it in there, you forget about it, and you're done. The Vitamix for smoothies just makes it really easy to throw things in there. The food processor, I don't know how I lived without that because I wouldn't be able to make my hummus without the food processor. So those are just some easy tips. And this was said by Albert Einstein: nothing will benefit human health and increase chances for survival of life on Earth as much as the evolution to a vegetarian diet. And he was a brilliant man. So with that, I believe we will be back out at our table selling our books if you'd like to purchase one. And we can also answer any questions that you have. So thank you very much.
Questions if you want.
We do? Mm-hmm. I learned we have time for a couple of questions. They're probably going to be geared towards Raj, though. So, anybody?
Did you have any risk factors before your heart attack that you were aware of?
Yeah, so there was a little bit of genetics. My father had a heart attack at 49, but beyond that, nothing else. My cholesterol was a little bit high, but not too high. My LDL cholesterol was in the 130s, 138, 140. I'd gained a little more weight. Maybe I was probably 20, 25 pounds, a little over where I should have been. But that was it, yeah. It's a good question. I mean, the theory behind heart disease now is one of the endothelium, which is the inner lining of the blood vessels. You want to sort of make that bulletproof. And it's when you eat foods that are heavy in fat and oil that you get damage to that endothelium. And the cholesterol gets oxidized, goes inside, and starts causing all kinds of problems. So it may not just be just weight alone that has to do with this. There probably, and may not even be cholesterol alone, there are probably other things involved in this that somehow switching your lifestyle seems to affect. Yeah.
Just a question. A friend of mine had 2 stents put in a couple of years ago. Just this week, a few days ago, it plugged up again, and he had 2 more.
Yeah.
My question is, and I'm familiar with Dr. Caldwell,
Yeah.
et cetera. will he have a good chance of it not clogging up again if he goes on a strict plant-based whole food diet? In your opinion?
Yeah. So you know what I didn't go into is I have actually an hour-and-a-half talk, and I did not go into a lot of that, but the story of my father. You know, he had a very similar situation. His stent kept getting plugged in, and he would come in year after year, stent within a stent within a stent. That can be done 7 times. And so when he finally switched to this diet, it stopped that cycle. It completely stopped that. The repeat angiogram showed that it was better. Yeah.
How have your colleagues reacted to your shift in diet?
Yeah, so they have actually been very good about it. And so I'm trying to establish a program to exactly do that. And so they have been very supportive. Yes, thank you. Yeah, and some of them are out there. Yeah, yeah.
Great, thank you.
Oh, actually, there's one more. Oh, is that time?
Go ahead, one more quick one.
Okay. I'm vegan, but I probably maybe use a little bit more earth balance than I should sometimes. So what do I have to like watch out for? What level is okay, or like should I be very conscientious about that?
I'm not sure what earth balance.
It's a margarine.
Oh, okay.
And I think there was a study, the Predimed study, that was done in Europe recently, and it showed that honestly, if you have, see, Raja had a heart attack, so his prevention is secondary prevention. For primary prevention, it's a little bit different, and there really aren't a lot of studies on that. The Predimed study showed that a low-fat diet, more Mediterranean-based, which you can do with vegan lifestyle, was the most likely to prevent a heart attack in the first place. So a little bit is okay. I definitely would not go above 30%, which is what AHA is recommending, but so I would watch it.